Good afternoon, and thanks so much for joining us. As you have heard, our recording has started. We will be recording this session and sending it out to everyone who attends or who signed up to attend. My name is Laura Weeldreyer, and first I want to thank you for joining us on today's webinar on early warning systems called Keeping Kids on Track. I am going to be one of your hosts today. I am the Chief Program Officer for Talent Development Secondary, and I am joined by Dr. Robert Balfanz, who is a Senior Research Scientist and Co-Director at the Center for Social Organization of Schools at Johns Hopkins University School of Education. Bob has really pioneered this research nationally and remains the voice of research and evidence in terms of high school graduation, early warning indicators, and many other relevant issues we're going to talk about today. So we're super lucky to have him with us. Bob, welcome.
Welcome. Glad to be here.
Thanks for joining, and thanks to all of you for joining. Let me just go over a couple of ground rules for our webinar today. We are going to have several opportunities where you can ask questions, and we would be happy for you to actually ask the questions when we get to those parts. If you have a burning question, you don't want to forget it now, type it into the chat window, which actually is not on the right-hand side, it's at the top of the screen. It looks like a little thought bubble. Just click on that, and you can type it for all participants to see, or you can type it specifically to the host if it is something you would rather everyone not see at the same time. Keep your phone on mute. We right now have muted everyone to make sure we're not getting background noise coming in. And there will be, as I said, opportunities throughout the presentation to invite your questions. So with that, I am going to hand the webinar over to Bob Balfanz.
Thank you, Laura, and thanks everyone for sharing this afternoon with us to learn a little bit more about early warning systems. Early warning systems, believe it or not, have been around now for about 10 years ago. 10 years. A decade ago, you could only find them in a couple of middle schools in Philadelphia and a couple of high schools in Chicago. Since then, their power and their promise has been demonstrated by, in many levels, by their growing and widespread use. And we're going to take advantage of what we've learned over those 10 years to sort of share with you today what really some of the current thinking, best practices, and most recent learnings are and how to effectively use early warning systems. I'm going to begin by just giving a brief overview of what early warning systems are, then spend a few minutes talking about some of the key learnings of what we've learned in the field about how to make them effective. We'll then actually go and learn from the field on some various ways to improve, keep kids on track to graduation and post-secondary success. We'll look at some evidence that these early warning systems work and talk a little bit about ESSA and early warning systems. And then we'll hear again from Laura about how schools and districts can get support to help implement these powerful tools. So the core idea behind early warning systems is that to graduate high school, college, and career ready, wait for the urban noise to go by. To graduate high school, college, and career ready, students need to successfully navigate some key transitions and acquire a set of academic behaviors. They, in essence, need to learn how to succeed at school. And students signal through this whole process that they are on and off track through their behaviors to graduating college and career ready. And the big insight for early warning indicators we're going to see is that for many years, the field of dropout prevention focused on student characteristics, their demographics, their age, their race, their gender, and actually wasn't very effective. It missed a lot of kids that needed help, and it gave help to kids that didn't need it. And it was only once we learned that there were key school behaviors that really signal you're on the path to success or not, that we were able to find the signals that really cued us in. Does this student need help, of what type or not? And the idea is that by tracking these indicators early, it's possible to identify the point in time when students are just beginning to fall off track, which gives us time to intervene or change supports and alter their trajectory through high school and beyond. And even, as importantly, what we've learned, it gives us enough time to try something, get it wrong, learn from it, do something else that is effective, and still get them back on track. So that's the power of monitoring kids closely, and as soon as they're raising their hand saying, help, I need some help, we're there to recognize it and to start acting upon it. And thus, by using these early warning indicators, schools can capture the data that will drive decisions about how they can best apply school-wide prevention, how to use their targeted intensive interventions the best, and also for which of those students that nothing short of sort of case-managed supports will work. Some of the basics, Early Warning Systems 101. Early warning systems combine a set of indicators, predictive indicators, that tell us these are the kids signaling they need help. Absent intervention, it's not going to get better. And an intervention and support system that responds to those indicators. On the indicator side, we use a small set of reliable and valid indicators that are predictive of outcomes we care about, things like graduation, post-secondary readiness. And each indicator adds unique information not captured by other indicators. We're trying to create a small set that tells us what we need to capture most of the kids who absent intervention won't succeed. And a key point in this learning we found is these are particularly powerful in high poverty environments. Because what we found in our foundational research is that early as 6th grade, students are signaling through their attendance, their behavior, their course performance, the ABCs, that absent intervention, they're not going to do better, they're going to do worse. They're not going to grow out of it as we hope in the middle school years we often do. But in fact, often students will just have a single indicator in 6th grade, and absent effective intervention and notice, they will have 3 or 4 indicators in 9th grade. So good early warning systems combine those indicators that are valid and reliable and help us see who's raising their hand with a response system. What we've learned over time is that the ABCs of school success, you have to be there to succeed, you have to be focused when you're there, and you got to get your work done, right? Every educator, every parent knows that's the blocking and tackling of school success. Nothing could seem more simple. But the truth is until very recently, we have not monitored all of our kids as a group and multiple people through different lenses, seeing are the kids on track and are they coming every day? Are they focused in class? Are they getting their work done? Individual report cards have this information. Parents receive it. But it was rare for teachers to see all that information about the kids they teach all in one point. Because one group collected attendance, one group did behavior, one group did courses. You wouldn't see anybody's report cards except for the grades you prepared. You wouldn't see your students' report cards. It's only by bringing this data together that we get this holistic picture and we're able to monitor these for student success. And what we've learned over the past 10 years, and this is what really gives this power, is these 3 simple things. Are kids coming every day? Are they focused in class? Are they getting their work done? Both can be predictive of dropping out and predictive of being ready for college and career. It's just different levels. So we know that students that are missing 10% or more of school are at great risk for dropping out. They are chronically absent. If you're missing 20 days of school a year, multiple years in a row, it's really hard to see how you're going to succeed. We've also learned that students that are both getting suspended but also mild sustained misbehavior, being sent to the office a lot. Absent that changing, you could see that ultimately doesn't lead to much success. And we've also seen that if students are failing a core course, that's a strong signal that they're not on track to graduate. And you could think about that, especially both in 6th and 9th grade. Especially in the middle school, it takes a lot to fail a class. Teachers are often forgiving. They often, if you try hard, they'll count the end of the course, not the start of the course. If you come to extra help, they'll find ways for you to get through. So to fail early in the middle grades is really a strong signal that the student is not getting the supports they need to succeed. And then by the time they get to high school, if they don't pass enough 9th grade classes, they don't earn enough credits to be promoted on time to 9th grade, to 10th grade, and that's the huge signal. Very few students retained in 9th grade, absent extreme interventions after the fact, end up succeeding. Now, the other thing we've learned that's very powerful and positive is the positive side of all of those indicators is what really predicts college and career readiness. So it's the kids that miss 5% and really 3% or less of school, come 97% of the time, just miss a week or less each year, are really the kids that are strongly on track to college readiness. It's students that have high levels of effort and agency, and it's students that have a B or better average. And again, this has been a big finding that's been really demonstrated again and again. It's counterintuitive to a lot of us, but we have to recognize the power of the data consistently showing it's true, that a GPA of 3.0 or higher becomes the strongest predictor of post-secondary success, higher than test scores, higher than credits earned, higher than courses taken, because it shows that students are able to navigate a range of teachers, are able to adapt their work to their demands and styles, are able to do some level of independent work, and are able to get their assignments in on time. Exactly the functions you need to do to succeed in college. So it's a direct measure of those behaviors and skills that are most needed to succeed in college. It's really captured in that B average. And it's sort of like a poll. One poll can be off by quite a bit, but if you have 5 or 6 or 7 polls, 5 or 6, 7 different adults giving their view of the level of work a student does and their ability to get it in on time, that's the B average. That tends to be a very powerful predictor. Now let's look at some key features of effective early warning systems. We've seen the basics. Now let's hear about what we've learned about what makes them powerful. The power of early warning system is combining actionable data with a human response, or we often say big data meets the human touch. Okay? So good data and easy access to it at the teacher and school leader level is fundamental. It is seeing that screen in front of you, which shows for the students in your class what their attendance is, what their behavior is, what their course performance is, other key factors, and uses color coding to help you figure out who's on track, who's not, so you can instantly see where the challenges are and what area, what patterns exist. That needs to be at the fingertips of teachers and principals for their students. They can't be asked to do 3, 4 clicks to assemble it. But as powerful and as important as that data is, it has no impact if we don't build human systems to respond to that data. So the power and the impact of early warning systems at the end live or die on the strength of the human systems we build to respond to that indicator, predictive indicator data. So what we found over time is what you need. If you're in a school that has any more than 20 kids with off-track indicators, you need some sort of team-based structure to deal with this. It's not a thing that one individual alone can deal with. You need to bring teams of adults, teachers, counselors, mentors, other student support folks who know the student, provide them time in the schedule to review the indicator data and to build responses. And the power of this is the more adults we can pool with insights into that student, the richer and more powerful our insights on what to do are. And what you have to imagine and see how profound the change this is for school practice and culture is that traditionally the student supports are left to individuals who play a role and deal with specific factors. A school counselor has a range of duties. A school social worker has a range of duties. Student support team, largely involved with special education identification, has a set of abilities. You might bring in specialists to deal with speech or behavior or other things, or psychologists. That has its power and its merits, but those people often end up getting huge caseloads of 100, 200, 300, 500 kids that they can't really give individual attention to. So they're doing the best they can for a subset of the students who come in front of them, and everybody else is sort of just praying for the rest. What early warning systems do is they flip that dynamic, and you now will have the situation where anywhere from 4 to 10 adults will be sitting around a table only for 5 to 7 minutes, but in that 5 to 7 minutes, they will all be pooling their insights on one kid or a group of kids. And that just leads to a much richer framework of what's going on, because each adult knows a different part of that student's story, and it's only by putting the whole story together do you have a sense of what needs to happen. And then the key thing is, once you've done this, you need to assign a champion who is going to be the one to at least monitor to see that whatever decision was made about the best support for that student is actually implemented. Because we know so often we have good intentions and we make a plan, and where that happens is people get busy and the follow-through doesn't happen. And if we don't know the follow-through doesn't happen, if we come back a month later and see nothing's happened, we might think that that intervention or that strategy wasn't effective, but in fact it was never employed. So it's very important then to appoint this champion to make sure that whatever the insight of the adults say is the best response actually happens. Once this has happened, we have to monitor the student, come back after a month or 2 weeks or 3 weeks or 6 weeks, whatever makes sense for what we're trying to do, and see if progress has been made. And if not, go to Plan B or Plan C. And this, again, is a big change of school culture and practice. Instead of saying we have one intervention, we do it, we stick with it, we hope it works, maybe at the end of the year we'll check, this constant monitoring, constant progress monitoring of all kids against the indicators gets us to a point to say, If plan A is not working after a while, we need to go to plan B. And the idea is we keep modulating the intensity and the type of our supports until we get the right thing. Once we do this, and here's another key step where people over time have both moved forward and fell back, is, again, these people are very busy lives in schools, doing many things. These meetings can be quite intense. Often the thing that doesn't get done is recording the fact of what the intervention was and did it have success. Because if the student's getting better, that's the main thing. Who needs to waste time recording that in a data system? But if we don't do that, we can't build our local knowledge over time, which lets us see which of our interventions work for which of our kids under which circumstances. That's where schools really build their local knowledge and their understanding of, for this type of kid, this works, for this type of kid, this does not work, and it lets them really build up their ability to become good interventionists and support staff by just taking that one final step of recording what they did, so every once a quarter they can come back and analyze of the things we tried for certain types of kids, for certain types of behaviors, what's working, what's not. Back one. No. Other way. There you go. And lastly, and this is really what this is almost like a year 2 or 3 of using early warning systems. It comes in after you've got the basics under control, is that folks have learned that it's really important to have some diagnostic tools at your ready when you're trying to understand the root causes of why a student's not coming, why they're not being able to focus in class or getting in trouble, or why they're not succeeding in their classes, is to really help you diagnose, is this driven by academic needs or social-emotional needs or both? And why this is so important is if we have the diagnosis wrong, we can actually make it worse and not better. If there's a student that has a series of unmet social-emotional needs, maybe they've experienced course failure before, so they're withholding effort now because it's too risky to try and fail again, so they're purposely withholding effort as a mechanism to explain why they may not succeed. Yet they may have a solid foundation of knowledge, and if you sort of say, I think you need a tutor, when really what they need is someone to work through that sort of fear that's been developed, they may turn off and say, I know this stuff. You don't really understand why I'm not succeeding. And so it's really important to understand what is driving those indicators to get the intervention right. It's also important to really start looking for patterns in the data to find what is the most strategic level for intervention. We're never going to be able to individually intervene our way out of need in schools that have hundreds of kids in need. We're going to have to see where we can move upstream and find something that will work at the classroom level or the school level or the grade level and support a larger number of kids. And we can see that in that data on these indicators if we look for patterns. A classic example is that you might be noticing that suddenly we've had a spike of kids failing science, and one reaction might be to try to find more science tutors. That's pretty hard to do at scale in the middle of the year. But if you looked at the pattern, you might see that almost all those failures were coming from a single teacher. And that would tell us that maybe it's better to go investigate and see how we can help that teacher rather than trying to get tutors for all the kids. So that's an example of how it's important to look upstream in the data to find patterns and trends. And then finally, when we're doing this, we can bring other data in to sort of understand the root causes once we've seen the signal, why they're signaling. Is it because they're overage? Is it because they're recent entrant ELL? These things will help us tailor our interventions and look at that larger group, larger than individual level. All right, now we're going to share some stuff that has been developed in schools using early warning systems and really some of the tricks they've learned, not tricks, powerful strategies to respond to the indicators.
Their toolbox.
Their toolbox. Thank you, Laura. Okay. So in attendance, and we're actually having another webinar in a month that's going to go deep on chronic absenteeism. So just touching on a piece of it today. A number of schools have learned over time that there are some simple strategies that work much better than they thought they would. One is to ask students to write a plan in some detail on what would it take to miss only one day of school next month. And what they found is the actual writing down of that helps both identify root causes the student would maybe not say right away, and just makes them much more cognizant of what they've committed to. And there's just good research from a number of fields that actually writing down a plan makes it much more likely to happen than just verbally saying it. Keeping up with the Joneses. Students are often shocked at the difference in the attendance rates of kids that are actually from their school going to college and those that are not. They often believe that whatever their attendance is normative to other kids, even when it's not. So just making them aware that students from the school that go to college tend to be here every day. Those students that don't tend to be here every day. And then finally, and most importantly, it's really important for them to help them understand that how a day here and a day there can really add up. It turns out that both parents and students themselves that are chronically absent underestimate their absenteeism by up to 50%. And the reason for this is you could just miss 2 days a month, every month, and end up missing a month of school. But when you ask people to reflect on their absenteeism, they just tend to think of the past month. And they'll say, oh yeah, I came most days. I guess there was a Tuesday I missed, and maybe last Thursday. That's not bad. I come pretty much every day. And really not recognizing that it's just those 2 days a month if every month adds up. So folks have gotten good leverage out of just sending simple nudge letters home, non-accusatory, non-challenging, simply factual, saying, so far to date, you've missed this much school. We really miss you and want you in school. If you reach this level, in general, this is a sign that it becomes hard to succeed. Just that simple information has been shown to get a couple percentage points bump in attendance simply by the fact that many folks underestimate how infrequently they are coming to school. Behavior, the thing that drives everybody crazy, takes tons of adult time and energy in schools, drains it away from ability to build other capacities. And one thing that many, many schools have seen is that at the end of the day, we actually have to model and teach resiliency, self-management, organizational skills. It often was the case in the past that those kids developed those skills often outside of school were the ones that went to college, and those that did not develop them, there was many other options they could have that led to good middle-class lives, and it wasn't necessary to demonstrate those in school. In my view, this is much like the reading revolution we did, where we thought kids could learn on their own, and then we realized that there was a structured way to teach kids that really matter for a big number of kids. It's the same with behavior. If we're not in the middle grades especially and through 9th grade really teaching resiliency, self-management, organization skills and modeling it, not all students will develop it. We also know, have seen clearly and from our lived practice, that learning is social-emotional. Yet, when we look at things like the Gallup student poll, we can see there is a big drop from 5th to 9th grade in how frequently students say they're recognized for doing good schoolwork. In 5th grade, nearly 80% of kids report that in the past week, someone gave them praise for doing good schoolwork, not just turning it in, not just whatever, but actually good schoolwork. That drops to 30% in 9th grade, with declines in the middle grade. So you can see why 9th graders often feel like no one notices, no one cares, what's the point of doing the assignment? No one's paying attention. Most high school students report they're either stressed or bored. Not a good situation, and that's why it's very important to involve them in the solution. And then finally, we have to implement on the preventative side positive behavior supports and restorative practices and alternatives to suspensions, because there the evidence is clear that even a single suspension, absent effective remediation for it, can throw kids off track to graduation. And what's happening here when you interview people on both sides of this is that adults tend to see this as the adult version of a timeout for kids, which seems pretty benign and pretty effective. Just cool out, let's separate, let's take a deep breath and come back and do better tomorrow. But many kids see it as being shunned. And you can see that it has a much stronger psychological effect than the adults intended. So that's part of why those become actually such strong signals. All right. Two other key things on behavior and effort is it's really important to work hard to ensure consistent academic and behavioral norms as kids travel from class to class. School to kids, especially in middle and high school when they see multiple teachers, is the collection of classrooms they pass through plus the hallways and the common rooms. And if you shadow a kid, it's a great thing to do. You will inevitably see great variation between class to class in the academic and behavioral norms. And what happens then is that kids shape their behavior in a very personalized way according to those norms, and they start talking about the mean teacher, the easy teacher, the nice teacher, the hard teacher, and adopt their behaviors accordingly. instead of seeing that this is how we behave and this is what's expected in school across all my classrooms, so in school it's just the way I behave. And schools that have seen a big upward spiral in this have really been able to build that consistency. And then another final key thing is this importance of building what are called success scripts in our students' heads, that effort leads to success. Because the truth is that when kids live in poverty, what they learn is that life is capricious, that your parents can be working 3 jobs and you can still get evicted. And so, as we talked about before, the best defense against that is to withhold effort, because you can say, I didn't really try, it was stupid, it was dumb, what it really matters, I'll try and I'll do fine. And that's protecting yourself from trying really hard and failing, which would be the worst situation to be in your view. And so we have to create places in school to build the success scripts to show that effort leads to success. And that often happens in sort of the elective space, in drama, debate, robotics, sports, all places where it's team-based, it's performance-based, you get multiple chances to do it so you can learn and do better rapidly. It's in that space that we really can, and others really help build up this idea of success scripts in students' heads. Course performance. Many schools report, like after a while, we've built up a suite of attendance supports and interventions and behavior supports and interventions. We're still at a loss of what to do about helping kids get better grades. And it's important to know on this, too, that kids themselves self-report that they don't know how to get better grades. The majority of kids say they do not have effective strategies to get better grades. So what some of our schools we've worked with over time is a series of questions to try to get more tailored responses to how to intervene on course performance. And it's by asking a series of questions about a group of kids that are not, and teachers can answer this rapidly because they're with them every day, right? They don't need to think deep. Are they there to hear the lesson? Yes or no? If they're there, are they focused in class? Are they paying attention? Yes or no? If they're there and paying attention, are they actually comprehending what's going on and being able to get their work done? And if they're doing all that, are they still not showing what they know on assessments, right? Because many kids can still do all that and still sort of have, for various reasons, not show what they know on assessments. And by figuring out where yes and where is no, it leads to a more tailored way to sort of have interventions in those areas. All right. All right, well, that's a good tale, Bob. You've got some good stories from schools. You've got some 10 years of learning. You've got some pretty clear-cut ideas of how to use indicators and response systems and build data and human systems to support them. Some nice taglines, big data meets the human touch. But does any of this work? Is it worth the time? And I would say that the good news is that the evidence is building, because it takes a while for evidence to build with a new intervention. The answer is yes. So I'm going to give you a few snippets of this. We recently worked on a long 7-year, large randomized control trial, sort of a medical model where schools flipped a coin. Yes, you got the intervention. No, you didn't. Otherwise, similar schools across 11 big districts, 40,000 students, 7 years, and it showed that having an early warning system with teams of teachers meeting regularly to analyze that data and supported by additional external support providers integrated in a very smart way from city year and communities and schools, and some good positive whole school reform supported by the talent development program, that we in fact were able to sort of bend the river, that take kids in 6th and 9th grade, the key transition years, that were heading off track, that during the year were in fact signaling they were off track, but by the end of the year we're back on track. And because of that, being able to show with a positive and statistically significant, increasing the percentage of students that ended 6th and 9th grade with no early warning indicators. And we know from the data that reducing indicators is good. Like if you have 3 and we get you to 2, or if we get you from 2 to get you to 1, that's better. But the big change is when you get to 0. That's when we see actually odds of graduation moving from 25% to 75%, right? That means, because 0 means like you're coming to school regularly, you're not getting in trouble, and you're getting your work done, right? You're getting back to the basics of blocking and tackling of school success. So it's important to show that across these are some of the highest need schools in America, by the way. 30% chronic absenteeism rates, 25% suspension rates. only a third of the kids, proficient or close to it. Hundreds of kids with early warning indicators. That even in those tough environments, that you're able to build models that can bend the river and take this from a path of being off track to on track. Mine didn't turn. Okay, no.
Back one.
Back a couple.
Sorry, small technical difficulties, everybody.
No, one more. It's the graph. There. All right, we got it. Our friends in Chicago Consortium, have done a lot of work with the Chicago Public Schools on track in 9th grade and building on track in 9th grade teams in many of their schools. Very similar model, teams of teachers using predictive indicators, working both to develop individual and group and whole grade solutions. And they're able to show very clearly that the on-track rate has gone up, which is the gray box. The graduation rate has followed several years later in close lockstep. So again, showing at a district level use of early warning indicators has led to a pretty solid progression of increasing on-track rates being followed by lagged improvements in graduation rates. The most recent What Works Clearinghouse Dropout Prevention Practice Guide. The What Works Clearinghouse is the federal effort in Institute for Educational Science, which tries to take an evidence-based approach and identify those programs and practices and strategies for which, using very rigorous screens, evidence indicates have an impact. They updated. There was a practice guide put out in 2008 on dropout prevention. Very recently, they put out the update. And the number one recommendation in the new dropout prevention practice guide for the What Works Clearinghouse is to monitor the progress of all students and proactively intervene with students showing early signs of attendance, behavior, and academic problems. So again, sort of that external review of all the evidence to date leads that to being the first recommendation of the What Works Clearinghouse prevention guide. Recently, the Massachusetts Department of Education asked a research firm, AIR, to help them figure out why some of their low-performing high schools, those that were level 5 in their system, needing the highest level of turnaround. In general, they hadn't been able to get anybody out of turnaround, but some high schools were progressing further than others. And they asked AAR to try to help figure out what distinguishes schools that were improving from those that weren't, high-needs high schools. And what they found at the end of the day, that one of the biggest differences is that those that were improving had been able to figure out how to implement effective student support systems, and those that had not were not, which is another piece of evidence to show the power of these sort of early warning and intervention systems. And really what's going on there, and we learn closely on the ground from our Diplomas Now project, is that when the level of student need gets so high in the most impacted middle and high school, it consumes all adult energy. Those needs do not sit quietly. They are not unexpressed by students. They don't sort of sit and suffer in silence. They become impactful to the school in many ways, that either it's very high levels of chronic absenteeism, which affect the whole school, or it's lots of behavior challenges, which consume adult attention, or it's large numbers of kids failing, which again leads to the need to have very elaborate, multiple chances to take courses, which limits the ability to take more advanced classes. And that just consumes and tires out the adults in the building and leaves very little time and space for them to build their capacity to implement more effective teaching and learning or new strategies. And so what we learn is we can go in and help stabilize that student need by both doing better tools and strategies like early warning systems, and in the highest need schools, bringing in additional person power from nonprofit organizations to give that second shift of adults, like a city year, communities and schools, that takes away some of that pressure and creates time and space for the adults to have the energy and the focus to improve their capacity. And that leads to a more positive upward spiral. And that's really why we're getting these findings that in the highest needs places, if you don't find an answer to that unmet student need, it's going to be very hard to do anything else until you do. And finally, we're just going to end up a little bit just making a connection between these early warning systems and ESSA, which is at the forefront of all of us that are in schools these days. And really just want to point out two key things. The early warning systems can help states and districts with this. They can help address key elements on state report cards like chronic absenteeism, like on-track rates, which many states are now measuring, and ultimately graduation rates. They can address the fifth indicator. 35 states have now chosen chronic absenteeism as that fifth indicator. They can inform needs assessments. This is very important that, again, in our work with high needs middle and high schools, often the level of need is underestimated. We have this belief that all struggling schools are the same and we know what they need. But the truth is that any two struggling schools could have quite different patterns and challenges walking in their door in ninth grade or sixth grade. And until you really know how many of your ninth graders have histories of chronic absenteeism, experience course failure, where are their specific academic holes, until you know that and can say, do we have the right scale and level of response to meet that need, you're often going to just always be sort of pushing against it. And then finally, they are, because we saw they have an evidence base, they can be an evidence-based strategy for comprehensive and targeted improvements. And because of that, it's possible to access ESSA funding, both Title I to support evidence-based interventions and Title II, teacher training. There's actually specific language about it could be used to address things like safety, peer interaction, and chronic absenteeism, which in a way is, in a broader sense, what early warning systems are trying to do. Before we open up to questions, I just want to then just briefly summarize. What we've learned in the past decade is that early warning and intervention systems are a really powerful tool to both identify who needs help and figuring out how best to help them. When done well, this actually dramatically changes how schools are organized and the culture they operate in. We go from this idea that student needs and supports are addressed by a small number of heroic but overwhelmed specialists by themselves, often in isolation, to a thing where it's the business of every adult in that school to help figure out what we need to do to keep all our kids on track to graduation and post-secondary success, and creating structures where they can pool their insights and knowledge about these kids. A quick example of this, when you think about it, at a high school level that's organized by departments, as many still are, is that in a departmentalized middle or high school, you really only have time in your schedule to meet with people in your subject. You can meet with the math department and talk math, which is very important and necessary, and when done well is a powerful reform strategy. But you have no idea who your kid's science, social studies, English, or other teachers are, because you might be teaching two 11th grade classes, a 10th grade class, a 9th grade class, an honors class. So when those students walk in your door, you only have that brief interaction with them, and you have no access to other knowledge about them. We were doing this in New York with a very veteran New York City school, very veteran faculty who, thought this was an interesting diversion that will pass, the reform flavor of the day initially, and ultimately became deeply convinced of its value, and to this day are doing it themselves at every grade level, self-run. It's a beautiful thing to see. But the story how they got there was told by a math teacher who said, initially I was very resistant to all this. I thought it was a waste of time until I was at a meeting, and I was then as a student who I saw in school every day, but not in my class, which was first period, so I knew he was cutting. I found that very disrespectful, and frankly, honestly, I couldn't wait to fail the kid because he never showed up and he wouldn't tell me why. And then the science teacher says, hold on. I've gotten to know him, and first period, he's taking his dad to chemotherapy. And he's afraid not to tell anybody because if he's afraid if he tells people, they won't let him do it. As soon as the teacher heard that, the math teacher, 180-degree turn, and she was thinking, how can I help this student navigate this difficult time and get through it and create a relationship with them? That's what she wanted to do. That was her passion of helping kids and being a teacher. She was just frustrated by what she thought the situation was. But unless a time and space was created for that science teacher to share that piece of information, that math teacher would have gleefully failed that student who was taking his dad to chemotherapy, which would then probably turn that student further against the school and the teacher for not understanding, even though he didn't tell them why, he wasn't there. And so that's just a story that highlights how powerful it is to create the space for those teachers to share what they know about kids and learn from each other's insights and find the best answer. And then finally, the advantage of having done this for a decade is lots of rich school knowledge is developed from small strategies about writing a plan for attendance to more profound ideas to say that we've really got to have, consistent academic and behavioral expectations class to class. That's how we can help all of ourselves have fewer kids have behavioral problems. It becomes our big intervention, right, at the grade level, as opposed to trying to individually solve each kid acting out because they're used to different expectations teacher to teacher. When they go from the jokey teacher to the strict teacher, they're going to the office for the same behavior the jokey teacher would laugh at, right? And until we smooth that out, we're creating lots of behavioral incidents that if we work together as a team, we won't have, right? Those are profound school-level insights that were generated by this idea of having predictive indicators, tiered responses, and a time and structure to pool adult knowledge to act on it. And with that, we're going to open up for questions. Is that right?
Yep. So let me just review how we're going to handle questions. You can type your question into the chat box, and I will read it for you. And I'm actually going to kick us off by asking you a question, Bob. Early in the presentation, this is something somebody already wrote in about. You just mentioned in one of your remarks about focusing on one kid for 4 to 7 minutes. Can you just expand, what's the context of that? And can you say a little bit more about what you meant?
Sure. So that one of the things that folks have had to work out is that when you start tracking these indicators, and again, if you're in a school of any level of need or poverty, you will soon have 30, 40, 50, 100 kids in that list, and that can seem overwhelming. Thank you for finally documenting the level of need we said we had. What are we supposed to do with that?
Right.
And that's where we found out that when you have these meetings, that you really need a protocol, you need facilitation, so it doesn't become just a gripe session or you just get bogged down on one student whose the needs are so intense. And really, you need to have a team leader. Often people invest in a facilitator initially for schools to learn this. They can really develop a protocol of saying, we're going to look at the data ahead of time. We're going to identify a set of kids that we think are just, it's hot now. They just started signaling, which means we can maybe do something about it because it hasn't been there forever. Or there's such an issue if we don't do something, it's going to create lots of other problems for other kids. Whittle that down to a group of 7 to 10 or 5, 7, 8, 10 kids, and then create a protocol. We're just spending a few minutes on each rapid thing around what do we know about this kid, what's the situation, what's been tried in the past, who has a relationship with them, what do we think is the best first course, who's willing to do it, okay, fine, record it, someone's got to record it in a sort of a spreadsheet or an online system, next. And then also, in that time, also taking some time to say, let's look for patterns. Does this student represent a pattern? Are there other students like this student that will help us understand a group of students to work with?
So I know I can hear, and probably you can too, that people are dropping off, and I just want to say there is one more section of the webinar. This is a pause for questions, but we are not done sharing information with you. So we just want to give people a chance if they had any burning questions. I will say we had a couple of folks who wrote messages early on that they have already have information systems and they're kind of geared up and ready to go, and we're basically just looking for your information to sort of nudge them into implementation. And implementation is what I am going to talk about next. So, hold on. Of course, as soon as I said we were ready to go, a question popped up. Have you looked at early warning indicators specifically for systems-involved populations, so child welfare, juvenile justice? We do have some experience with this, don't we?
We do. So what's interesting about this is that, and this is a learning from the past, that in the past people will just say, if you're in those systems, you're at high risk of dropping out, we've got to do something. That's not a bad presumption, but it also can become a self-fulfilling prophecy. And what we've learned is that you really want to say, are they signaling on these key indicators? Are they coming regularly? Are they focused in class and not getting in trouble? Are they getting their work done? If the answer is yes to all that, it means let's still keep an eye on them because they are sort of a vulnerable population and things can change quickly. So let's make sure that next week is not a different story. If they are signaling, then you want to use that information about their agency involvement to both help you find solutions and things to avoid. So that information comes more in the solution side than the identification side, and that really helps us focus on the school behaviors that matter as opposed to the characteristics of the kids coming in the door. The final thing I will say is that it's also true that those kids tend to be high on these indicators as groups.
Yeah. So what's the implication of that? Would you change those thresholds that you showed earlier, or?
No, the thresholds are the thresholds. I mean,
okay.
Those are the thresholds for school success. It just means that you may want to also look for group solutions if you have high numbers of those kids.
Got it. Got it. Well, and actually, just to piggyback on that, I would say you talked just now about individual kid focus in EWS meetings, but one thing we have learned over the years is that it probably isn't enough to only look at the individual kid level, right? So you've got to aggregate the data up, because otherwise you might miss big patterns and trends. So if it turns out you're looking at kid by kid and teams of teachers, you might miss that actually 75% of the ninth graders are failing Algebra 1. And that means it's not an individual kid solution. It's actually a school level or team level solution that you can't just keep throwing tutors.
Absolutely.
If 75% of the kids are failing Algebra 1, right?
Absolutely. That's why that key question in your protocol is, does this kid represent other kids? Are there other kids like this with the same indicator or the same reasons that we can treat as a group? And you can also sometimes dedicate an early warning meeting just to group level analysis. That's the other thing. If you do this often enough, which you should, ideally weekly, every third week or every fourth week can be a specific group analysis of an indicator as a way to even make that at the forefront of how you sort of do your work.
Okay. I think there are a couple more questions coming in, but we're going to move forward a little bit. There will be another chance for questions to be answered at the end, so don't stop typing. If you have a burning question, keep going. I just want to move forward a little bit and talk about what we have learned about implementation. I'm Laura Weeldreyer. I'm the Chief Program Officer at Talent Development Secondary, and we partner with schools, districts, and state departments of education all over the country, and we've been doing it for 20-plus years. We support a great deal of early warning systems work in the schools that we work with, and we are the implementers of the research that comes from Dr. Balfanz's work here at Johns Hopkins University School of Education. So what I want to talk about is, having worked in schools, districts, and states, what do we know about what it takes to implement early warning systems effectively, with fidelity, and powerfully? And so I want to focus on the support. So I looked at the list of who was joining today, and I know we have a wide range of participants, from school-level folks, like some of you who wrote to me earlier, who are just chomping at the bit, ready to get going, all the way up to state departments of education who may have put an on-track indicator into their accountability plan or chosen chronic absenteeism, and now you've got to figure out, what do we tell schools or districts to do with this data? So any of us who've spent any time around schools know that there is an avalanche of data in schools. There's so much data that it becomes kind of like noise, right? You don't know, what should I listen to? What should I look at? When should I look at it? What's the most important? So that is what an early warning system can help you start to screen out the noise and focus in on some of the data that really matters and is extremely actionable and as close to real time as we can get in schools. So when we work with schools, here are a variety of things that we do with and for schools, many of them developed over time because of the effectiveness we've seen in the field. So a lot of times, take a step back. Every piece of data Bob has talked about today already exists in your schools. I don't know you and I don't know where you're from, and yet I'm 100% certain you have all this data. There's nothing mysterious about attendance, behavior, and course grades. It's like the basic building blocks of what you have in your possession as educators. The question is, can you get it into a format where you can look at it side by side and actually start to see kids' information, not in a variety of different screens, or like one's in a student information system, one's in electronic grade book, one's in handwritten referrals to the office, or you have to pull a kid's report card or cumulative file. How can you get it stacked up so that you can make this very, very easy, very visual to see? Because the data collection and analysis should never be the obstacle to getting adults and kids acting in schools. So sometimes schools and districts just need help to kind of pull all of those various sources of data together in an easy to basically glance at. There's not even any very fancy analysis here, but to scan the page, red, yellow, and green, and focus in on the kids with a lot of red. So that's the first thing that you need to think about having, and who can help you do that. It's probably helpful to get your teams together and give them some training on why are we doing this, why is it necessary, how are we going to fit this into our current meeting schedule. So if you have collaborative planning time that you can repurpose. We've seen schools do incredibly creative things to get this into their schedules. And the bottom line is, don't let good be the enemy of great. If you are in departmental teams, we're supporting a high school right now. If that's what you've got this year, then that's where you start, and you start doing it there. And I can tell you that already after one meeting, the teachers themselves said it would be really helpful if we could talk to all the other teachers of these kids. So the teachers themselves realize this isn't the ideal structure, and how can we set this up? How can we learn the process this year and set it up for next year so that it can be even more effective? So the ability to train teachers and then observe meetings, facilitate meetings, and coach those who are charged with facilitating those meetings would be another piece to strong implementation. You heard Bob talk about matching students with interventions, and some schools are rich in partners and programs and interventions, and some schools have very little. But every school to do this is going to need to go through the process of mapping interventions. So some of this is figuring out what is the school response, and do we all agree, and can we all implement it? This is that conversation where some teachers on the first floor figure out that there's like a supply closet full of something on the third floor that they haven't known anything about, or there's like graduate social work interns in the school that, you know, only a few teachers have taken advantage of, and most of the schools never referred anybody to. Or you have to be very creative and think about who are the teachers who are having the most, who are hitting the most effectiveness, either the fewest failures, fewest behavior problems, and what are they doing, and sort of mine your own talent base for what are the most effective practices in your school. So Bob talked about the need for consistency. So part of this is like a codification process of everybody agreeing on what the interventions will be, and then part of it is getting that consensus from the group that this is how we are going to approach these things, and smoothing out those inconsistencies between the jokey teacher and the mean teacher. The reason that you need a tracking system is because you want to actually create a record here of what you've tried with the student, what was effective, not effective. That way next year you don't start over with creating this, you know, sort of knowledge management about what interventions have been tried for an individual student. You also get some sense then of how staff is adhering to the resource mapping and the intervention mapping that you have done together. Sometimes schools and districts might need help in developing, can you move forward a slide, please, in developing the most high leverage and evidence-proven interventions. So in schools that don't have a lot of partners or programs, this might be something you really have to tackle as a faculty. What are we going to do as we get to sort of Tier 2 and Tier 3 need if we don't have ready-made answers for that? So one thing that we have supported schools with doing that is very effective is setting up mentoring as a Tier 2 intervention response. So if you flash forward, Kathy, one thing I just want to mention is the My Brother's Keeper Success Mentor Initiative, which there is evidence-based data to support the use of a mentor model that's aimed specifically at reducing chronic absenteeism. It was started in New York City and now being used by 30 districts around the country. really took off under Obama's My Brother's Keeper initiative over the last couple of years. So this is something, because it's an evidence-based model, that we often, and can be done by people in school. So it's a low to no cost intervention. Of course, it can also be done with external partners if you have access to people who are willing to be mentors. But it is an example of an evidence-based practice that we can help schools implement if that's what they're seeing the need for in their early warning indicators. And then the last thing, actually, can you go forward, because I'm going to skip that. The last thing that I want to mention is that it's one thing to work with schools in big urban centers or metropolitan regions that have, a variety of nonprofits or school partners in the school community who might be able to come in and help with some of this. But one thing we know is that there are schools that are very spread out, rural, outer ring, even suburban schools that actually need help building the capacity to do this work themselves. So one thing that we have developed as a result of some work that we've done around the country is an early warning system certification process. So this is micro-credentialing for individuals or teams. Gives them access to a personalized training process that we can tailor to specific contexts. And this is for the purpose of building site-based capacity to implement, lead, and sustain early warning systems. So it's great if you have, Bob said you might want to bring somebody in to facilitate. If you are a very rural school in New Mexico, you might say, well, who would that be? But we tried to think of a variety of ways to support schools that are interested in implementing this kind of work and need different kinds and levels of support. All right. With that, I'm going to pause and hit Bob with some more questions. So let's see. How do you recommend targeting interventions at a school where an exceedingly large number of students exhibit early warning indicators? You were just touching on this, such as where 25%, I think, are failing one or more courses, or there's chronic absenteeism in 25% plus of students of 10% or more days, and 5 to 10% of students are exhibiting sustained misbehavior and getting suspended.
Yeah, so you have a honest to goodness high need school, and in that situation, you really probably, our diplomas now learning, you have to sort of combine whole school changes with enhanced student supports guided by an early warning system. So it means that you're going to need some sort of teacher teaming system, so you can have teams of teachers working with common sets of students who they know, so that they're able to pool their resources about that subset of kids, and that's their universe, is those kids, not all kids in the school, and build those common experiences and interventions. You're going to need lots of upfront prevention work. You're going to need to have attendance campaigns, which combine, a welcoming thing, a welcoming culture, a place kids want to be, with recognitions for improvement, not stuff, but just shout-outs, most improved homeroom, the homeroom that's been able to go 2 weeks with only, with everyone coming every day, sort of some peer-based challenges. Some schools have had 12th graders become captains of 9th grade homerooms. You're my team. I expect you here every day. I'll be the one calling you when you're not here. Leverage some of that peer pressure for some of that sort of whole school things. You're going to have some sort of mentor program, like we talked about. Once a kid is chronically absent, you're going to either have to change a behavior or solve a problem. That's true for behavior and course performance too. It's really hard to change a behavior and solve a problem if you don't have a relationship with that student, right? And you have to think about how to assemble the person power both within the school and external community groups to have that person power that can be the one to say, I expect you in school today, and if I don't see you, I'm going to call you and figure out how to get you here, and I'm going to check if you got your homework done, and I'm going to see that you're getting along with everybody. That sort of continual sort of support, that there's going to be a good 20% of your kids, if you said, are going to need that. So you have to think about how can you organize that. And then finally, you're going to have to think about those highest need school kids that are really taking up so much energy is how to get effective partnerships with youth service agencies and people that can do case management, because those kids typically have such strong out-of-school challenges that until you find a means to solve them, it doesn't matter how strong the school is. It's not easy work, but we have seen schools that can take that tiered approach of both changing how the school operates, increasing the number of second shift adults supporting kids, and then a strategy for their highest needs kids, all sort of glued together with an early warning system. We've seen schools, and it doesn't happen overnight, but within a 2 to 3 to 4 year period, have some tremendous changes in their sort of outcome and environment.
Okay, a very much more specific question, and that is, should excused absences be included in an early warning system?
That's a great question. Yes.
It is a good question.
Excused absences, so chronic absenteeism, missing 10% or more of school for any reason, excused absence, unexcused absence, and suspension. Because what you're measuring is when they're not in school. The reason matters for solutions, but the reason doesn't matter for, is this student missing too much school, that's going to be hard for them to succeed. So that's why you're for chronic absenteeism, you're calculating not being in school for any reason, seeing what is the cumulative total of those days, and then reacting to that. And it could be just to let people know that, like, if in fact this person had pneumonia, then yes, they're chronically absent, but they had pneumonia, and as soon as that's taken care of, the situation, as long as they can catch up their work, is not going to require sustained intervention.
Okay, I hope that you considered that to be a softball question, because now I have another harder question. Do you have recommended student-to-support provider ratios? So like clinicians, you mentioned case managers, to effectively monitor and intervene with students. So this is from a school that says in the last decade, my school has grown at 38%, I guess, total enrollment, while the number of FTE psychologists and social workers was reduced by 30%. It's a bad story.
Yep. So to support the challenge you face, one of the deep structural reason why we still have schools with such high levels of unmet student need is that we've concentrated our highest need students in a subset of schools not designed for that level of need. And until the deep solution is not having schools like that, along the way to get there, we have things like we're talking about that can make it better. The ratio is really about the intensity of the kids' needs. If the level of kids' need is that they need almost daily attention, that ratio is quite small. If the ratio is that you only need to see the kids once every 2 weeks, it's quite a bit bigger. But the truth is that all our support staff in almost all our high-need schools have caseloads of students way beyond what the capacity is to do quality support for those kids.
So I hope you're really feeling warmed up, because here is another challenging question. Talk about what you've seen. Let's say a school makes a concerted effort and tackles chronic absenteeism. What happens then? Do behavior problems get worse because now more kids are in school? Or what's kind of the shifting domino effect of addressing specific early warning indicators?
So there's two ways to answer that question. The positive way is that getting kids to come more regularly over time leads to a much better school environment. And the reason for that, and for everybody, because the reason is that when chronic absenteeism rates are high in that 20-25% range, it affects everybody, not just the kids who are chronically absent. So what will happen, because teachers are put in a no-win position, is that because it's different kids missing your class on different days. It's not 3 kids never showing up. It's 3 different kids on every day not being there. That puts you in the no-win position of either having to say, let me remind you what we did yesterday. Losing the kids that were there, they might start acting up, then you have to take more time to address that. Or you have to say, if you weren't here, ask a friend, we have to move forward. In which case, those kids you will get frustrated and start acting up, and you'll have to pause to address their behaviors. It's a no-win situation. So the answer is reducing chronic absenteeism will create much more consistent classrooms and provide more teaching time. It is possible, and I will not deny this, some schools have seen short-term bumps in behavior because kids that have more challenges or are in school more often, but you have to address that by having better approaches to behavior, right? And you have to fix the B as well as the A, right? You can't, if you may start with the A, but then you have to work on the B. In almost all cases, that smooths out over time, particularly if you're focusing on having a welcoming school climate and what are seen as sort of, fair discipline policies that are sort of, fairly applied. In those circumstances, those short-term blips work themselves out, and then actually overall school climate improves, and attendance and behavior then start improving together.
All right, thank you. Last call for questions, everybody.
And I'll just add a codicil to that, which is that one thing we have to be cautious about is trying to solve an A or a B and a C by sacrificing the B or the A. So in many of our policies, we don't even recognize do that. If you're absent for 10 days, you have to fail the class.
Right.
If you're chronically absent, we might suspend you. These are all things where they're all designed to make the kids take personal responsibility, but we have to find a way that they take personal responsibility that doesn't increase an early warning indicator. And sometimes that's just not been in our radar screen because we thought very few kids would be in those buckets, but in a high-needs environment, many kids can be in those buckets.
Well, my favorite one is if you miss a certain number of days, you get suspended, which then you just miss more days.
Right.
Yeah. Well, that's a good point, is that those policies might have been written at a time when things were different or schools change over time, student needs change over time, and, so worth examining the things that are on the books.
And, the final just lived advice is just start doing the work. It's not going to be easy. You're going to make mistakes, but you're going to see a lot of power. Really, when you get teams of adults pooling their knowledge against predictive indicators and looking for strategic solutions, even in schools under extreme stress and duress, that more often than not will lead to improvement.
Yep. So I'm going to reiterate, don't let good be the enemy of great. Let's just review. We have a couple things coming up that we want to share with you before everybody signs off. We have a Talent Development Secondary Summer Institute in New Orleans, July 10th and 11th, that will focus exclusively on chronic absenteeism, and we would love it if you can join us for that. There will be registration information available soon. We will send it out to our mailing list, and it will be on our website as well. And then finally, we have another webinar coming up in exactly a month from today on March 27th at 3 p.m. Eastern. And the topic will be ESSA and chronic absenteeism, current trends and best practices. And we will be fortunate enough to be joined by Dr. Robert Balfanz again.
So our and Bob show will continue.
It will. So join us again. We'd love to see you. And thanks so much for your time and attendance today. Thank you, Bob.
Thank you, Laura.
Take care, everybody.